Hello? Well, I can go ahead and pray for us. We got about a minute. Dear Lord, I thank you for the blessings you give us, the opportunity to come together here and to worship you and to study your word. I pray that this time will be used for your glory and will be edifying as we go through the new book. In your son's name I pray, amen. Is anyone else showing up? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and start. So, we are winding down. We have now technically gone through 10 prophets. That leaves us with 2. And you should be able to guess which of the 2 we're doing tonight, because one of these is the last, and we're not going to do the last one next. So we're going to be in Joel. So we've gone through our 8th century prophets, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah. That's all right. And we've gone through our 7th century prophets, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Obadiah. And we are presently going through our post-exilic prophets. We did Haggai. Last time we finished Zechariah, for those who are here and for those who remember. And so tonight we're going to start Joel, a fan favorite. A lot of fun things in Joel. So here's our relative timeline, and you can see why this is mildly helpful. We are out of the 500s, and we're now in the 400s. We're now in the 5th century. Joel and Malachi are kind of somewhere together. Here we've got my broader timeline. You can kind of see. We'll clarify this presently. So our study is on the book of Joel. My subtitle, The Great and Terrible Day of the Lord. We'll get to why that's obviously significant for Joel. Now the book begins, the word of the Lord that came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Now, we have our prophet, right? His name is Joel. My brother's name is Joel. We have his lineage. And usually we're given that so that we can kind of pinpoint who this guy is. So the logical question should be, who is this Joel? And the simple answer is, we just don't know. We have no other information. There is nothing else in this book to let us know who he is, who his father is, or even when this is written, which is very, very frustrating. As I've already alluded to, but just as a refresher, there are 2 prophets that we know pretty much nothing about. Who they are, what they did, where they are chronologically, and that, of course, is Obadiah and Joel. I've said all along that we're pretty good on the other 10 minor prophets, but when it comes to these 2, you can almost flip a coin. It's pretty bad. There are a lot of views. We don't need to go through all of them, but there are 3 dominant views about when Joel was writing. And there's some ways that we kind of tease how to narrow it down a little bit. But first view is that he is early pre-exilic, 9th century, based on his position in the Old Testament between Hosea and Amos, as well as references to Tyre, Sidon, Philistia, Egypt, and Edom. You've got some references. So this would put him somewhere out there. All right, that would put him much earlier in our Assyrian period. Our second view, a late pre-exilic date, Joel 3:2 refers to the Babylonians. So that would put him somewhere about there. So between Habakkuk and Obadiah. Now our third view is a post-exilic date. There is no exilic date, and we'll get to why that is. But a post-exilic date sometime after possibly 515. You got Joel 3 refers to the destruction of Jerusalem, and references to the temple apply to what must be the second temple. So the first is gone, and so when it talks about the temple, it must be the new temple. So it would be well after Ezra. And that puts him somewhere there. So we are past Ezra, so Habakkuk, Zechariah, they're in the rearview mirror because they're alive during the rebuilding of the temple. but he is still before Malachi. So Malachi is somewhere in the mid-5th century. That's pretty well established, that's pretty well accepted. So this would put him early 5th century. I'm happy with this. This is clearly where I put him in the study, and I like this for not only textual reasons, but also thematic, theological reasons, as we'll go through. So this is where we're going to put him. Also, this puts him, this makes him uniquely one of our two end timers. So we're dealing with the eschaton. So we're not just apocalyptic, we're not just about the end of the world type thing, but we're talking about like the end of everything. And that gives us two prophets. We got Joel and Malachi. So they are looking way, way, way into the far distant future, which is fun. Joel, he loves his focus on the day of the Lord, which we will go through. And of course, Malachi, he loves to talk about the fear of the Lord and the promise of the coming Elijah. So again, we'll get to Malachi later. Here's our outline. I kind of like a bit of a chiastic structure, as you can see here. So the first section is going to deal with this plague, which we'll talk about today. And then the plague is sort of a pretense to talk about a coming judgment, which we'll talk about today. And then you can see at the bottom, there is going to be a reversal of this plague, where God is going to bless Israel. And before that, you're going to have a judgment on the nations. So we have Israel is being judged at the beginning. Israel's blessed at the end. Between those, you have a judgment against Israel, which is sort of mirrored with a judgment against the nations. And in between, which is usually where the real focus of the book is, you have a call for repentance, as well as the promise that God is going to respond to his people. So the way that I've kind of broken this up is in 3 sections. So we'll have today and then the next 2 weeks. And we're going to do the A and B, which I think work really well together, and then we'll do C next time, and then the second A and B, or B and A, last. So today we're going to focus on this plague, which is one of the more famous parts of Joel, even though there's a lot more in Joel, as well as this coming judgment. And what does that mean, especially considering we've already gone through 10 other prophets. So what is this, what's this other judgment that's coming? So, part 1, right, the local judgment, the judgment against, I'll say Israel, but it's post-exilic Israel. Verse 1 again, the word of the Lord that came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Verse 2, hear this, you elders, listen, all you inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell your children about it, and let your children tell their children, and their children the next generation. So something catastrophic has happened. And this is, I think, kind of interesting. We've seen this sort of pattern before. We've seen this sort of formula before. Something has happened that has created a bit of a cultural significance. And it is then beholden to the generation that lived through that event to use it as a teaching point to future generations. This is not exclusive to Israel. This is a good thing that most nations should use as needed, so that future generations do not commit the same mistakes of the past. Without getting too political, which is always a dangerous thing to do in church, but something that I lived through as a young teenager was 9/11. And the cry that you kept hearing over and over again is, we never forget, right? Have we remembered what went through in 9/11? I've said this before, we are not a wise country. And one of the main reasons for that is we just refuse to teach the next generation. We just kind of treat each generation as its own thing. They're disconnected. And I put a lot of the blame on this for the previous generation because I was very young at this. But I have no doubt that my generation, the following generations, will make the same mistakes. And we can keep going back to previous disasters. I can talk about Pearl Harbor or the Civil War or whatever. But we endure these calamities as a nation, and then we never learn anything from them. And I can point to other countries of what I'm talking about, France, England, and so on. But something has happened here in Joel's time, and he immediately says, okay, something has happened, the purpose of which is so that the nation will learn from it and then teach your children so that the children won't make the same mistakes. Are they going to learn? No, they're not, because this is just what happens, right? We just refuse to learn, and not only do we refuse to learn, but for some reason we just refuse to teach the next generation properly. This is one of the big, I won't say failings of the Bible, is that the people never learn this very basic lesson, and it goes all the way back to Deuteronomy. I mean, there are plenty of passages I could do, but in Deuteronomy 6, you have one of the more famous utterances of this. Repeat them to your children, talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. It's been pointed out, and this is just beautiful sort of poetic imagery. When you are sitting, right, just sitting around in your house, not doing anything, just being idle. When you walk, right, when you're going about your day, so we have a change in motion. When you lie down and when you get up. So basically, at any point in your existence, because you're doing one of these four things, right? You're either sitting around doing nothing, you're walking around doing something, or you're lying down, likely to go to sleep, or you're getting out of your rest. So this pretty much covers everything. At any point during the day, you should be doing this. And then we get what's probably a little exaggerated. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them as a symbol on your forehead. Were they really supposed to write on their bodies? Well, we know tattoos were forbidden, but were they binding boxes on their foreheads like some Jews do today? Probably not. This is probably hyperbole. But the idea is this should always be on your person, at least conceptually. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Right? The idea is not just that you remember, I love right at the beginning, repeat them to your children. The idea is not just that you remember, but that you live in such a way that you instruct the next generation. I will leave it there. But, verse 4, what the devouring locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust has left, the young locust has eaten. And what the young locust has left, the destroying locust has eaten. So, this calamity apparently was this massive invasion of locusts. And it was something that Israel has never seen, or at least it was really, really bad, and there was nothing in their collective memory or written record or whatever that reflects anything quite as bad as this locust invasion. And it's just, everything is gone. Now, in my translation, and in all of your translations, whatever you're using, there should be some differences here. So like in here, you got the devouring locust, the swarming locust, the young locust, and the destroying locust. The reason for that is they're all different words. Now, why do we have 4 different terms for locusts? And there are 2 schools of thought. School of thought number 1 is they just mean the same thing. They're just 4 words for locusts. The second school of thought is they don't mean the same thing. They are not the same. Well done. Those are the 2 options. There are people who go to school for many, many years to come up with these 2 options. If they mean the same thing, why do you have 4 words for locusts? What's the point? If they don't, then obviously, what's the distinction? And how do we narrow down the distinctions? Well, the fact is, we don't really live in, first millennia Israel. We can't really ask them. It's not like we have scientific texts that describe or define each of these individual words. We know they refer to locusts, but we don't know if we're talking about species of locusts or if we're talking about stages of development. A very popular way of explaining this, and as soon as I do it, you're like, oh, that's great. It's really enticing. It sounds really good. It's just a theory, and we have no way of verifying this. But it's fun to talk about. So one theory is that these refer to the stages of development for the locust. So you have the word gazam, arba, yaleg, and chatzil. And you can see over here that you have the winged locust. So again, we're talking about stages of the development. So you have winged locusts that can't fly yet, And of course, in our insect taxonomy or whatever, classifications, we have documented this, and we have our own phases of the growth, maturity of the locust. So you've got the adult locusts, they can swarm, they can fly. You have the hopping locusts, which are newly hatched, and then you have the nymph locusts, which are pre-winged, and they can start laying eggs and so on. We do see these different terms used elsewhere. So for example, in Nahum, it talks about the young locust, which is the yeleg, and then you have the swarming locust, which is the arba. Why is this important? So the way that people have explained this is, what made this swarm so devastating is you had basically an initial invasion of young locusts that started eating everything, they started laying eggs, and then that second, those eggs, they grew up, and then you basically had a second swarm, and that's what made this so devastating. Now, does the text actually say any of this? No, so we're reading a lot into it. Could these just be different types of locusts that have all come at once? So instead of having one species, you have different ones that have all swarmed at the same time. That's possible. Whatever it is, it's really, really bad. One of the things that really impresses me about Joel, especially these first two chapters, is we seem to have a lot of overlap with two of our earlier books, particularly Amos and Jonah. We're talking about why. So early on in Amos, we had this kind of threat. I struck you with blight and mildew, the locust devoured your many gardens and vineyards, your fig trees and olive trees, yet you did not return to me. And then in verse 4:10, I sent plagues like those of Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword along with your captured horses. So we're told, this is of course before the Assyrian invasion, that God was already sending things that should have been interpreted as signs. Right? He had sent locusts, he had sent blight and mildew. I don't quite know what an infestation of mildew would look like, at least in a supernatural sense. I mean, I know what mildew is, but it's just kind of funny to think that you're in your bathroom or whatever, and mildew's everywhere, and you should interpret that as a sign that God's unhappy with you. I don't know if any of you have ever had that thought. Maybe you should. I don't know. If there's a lot of mildew in your bathroom, maybe you're not right with God. But we get the... I'm leaving it there. But we do get the locust coming, right, as being some sort of great plague. And that this is meant to be seen as, I just think it's funny, a supernatural plague of mildew. But we've got the infestation of the locust. This is even one of the 10 plagues, right? It's number 8. Amos even threatens us, and we see this over and over again in the prophets, this threat of the plagues returning. God's going to use these plagues. So here in Joel, there's been this really, really bad invasion of locusts, such as they've never quite seen before, presumably even worse than whatever Amos had. And again, I like the symmetry of it. So we had the plague back in Amos, which kind of precedes all of that first set of prophets leading up to the Assyrians, and now we have another locust invasion, which is preceding something even worse. As I've already said, some scholars will just kind of compare this to, we'll move them earlier and basically say, well, this is back with Amos's day, and maybe this is the same locust invasion. I don't do that. I like the idea that these are different time periods, but there you go. So this has come, and this is clearly something supernatural, something that is leading to God doing something. So verse 5, wake up, you drunkards, and weep. Wail, all you wine drinkers, because of the sweet wine, for it has been taken from your mouth. For a nation has invaded my land, powerful and without number. Its teeth are the teeth of a lion, and it has fangs of a lioness. Larry's not even here. So, and this is one of the, because we're in Joel, right? And we just can't help it. So, are we talking about an environmental disaster, right? Something has invaded the land, right? We go back. We've had this nation has invaded. It's powerful without number. That sounds like an army, right? But then it talks about its teeth are the teeth of a lion. I don't think that they've been invaded by an army of lions. I don't think that's, for those who've watched The Lion King, I don't think Simba has assembled his pride and invaded Israel. So this is clearly something poetic. Now, is he talking about the locusts? I don't know. Is he talking about another army? I wouldn't think so, because where we are in the time period, they shouldn't be invaded. Is it possible that he's talking about something future? And I know if Larry's here, he'd get all excited. I don't know. I don't know if this is something present, if he's describing the locusts, or if this is something future. If it's future, how future? Are we talking the Greeks? Are we talking the Romans? Are we talking modern times? Or are we talking something even further into the future? I don't know. This is an apocalyptic book. This is the joys of apocalypticism. Verse 7. It has devastated my grapevine and splintered my fig tree. It has stripped off its bark and thrown it away. Its branches have turned white. Grieve like a young woman dressed in sackcloth, mourning for the husband of her youth. Again, so it's destroyed everything. We've got a lot of figurative language. So the land is barren, and it immediately switches over to the image of a young woman who is left destitute and possibly also barren. So we have the two images, right? The land as well as the young woman. We get the image. We have seen this type of imagery before, not only the devastation of the vineyards, the devastation of the land. We saw it in Amos, we saw it in Hosea, but we also have the promise that it's going to be restored. This is a tad frustrating, because if we're talking about Joel, right, and Joel is after the exile, then it seems like they're back in the land, and this shouldn't be a concern anymore. We're going to get to that, because this is going to be an ongoing thing. Because even in Malachi, we're going to see some of this. There are problems in the land. There are problems with the priesthood. They have not brought about the blessings they thought they would yet. So they have not entered into the true restoration of Israel. I mean, that should seem rather obvious to us, because none of us are Jewish, right? So the promises have not been fully realized yet. So I don't see this as a huge contradiction. Verse 9. Grain and drink offerings have been cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests who are ministers of the Lord mourn. Now, this is an important verse, right? Because we're talking about not only the house of the Lord, the temple, but also the priests. So right off the bat, this should limit us somewhat. We can't be exilic because there's no temple. There's no priesthood. This had to have been written when there was still a temple and there were still priests. Yeah. So either we're dealing with before the Babylonian invasion, as I've said, you got the early date, you got kind of the somewhat early date, or we're talking about after Ezra's temple, which puts us sometime after 516. As I've said repeatedly, and as I'm defending, I think we are post-exilic. I think we are past Ezra, dealing with, again, end times. We're apocalyptic, and that's just how I'm going to treat it. But also, not only is the temple rebuilt, but he mentions the priests. So the priests are functioning in the temple. Well, where do we get that? We just covered Zechariah. So back in Zechariah 3, listen, Joshua the high priest, you and your colleagues sitting before you, indeed, these men are a sign I'm about to bring, my servant the branch. Notice the stone I've set before Joshua. On that one stone are 7 eyes. I will engrave an inscription on it. This is the declaration of the Lord of hosts, and I'll take away the guilt of this land in a single day. Joshua has been purified, he's been sanctified, and he has now been given the authority of the high priest. And so now, as we're told in Zechariah, I don't have all the verses, but we went through it, the last couple of weeks. The priests are back in business. They are serving in the temple, they're taking sacrifices, so everything is at least functioning that way. So when Joel is talking about the temple and talking about the priests and the sacrifices, that shouldn't surprise us, because we're after Zechariah. Now again, if you're thinking, well, but Zechariah makes us think that the priests are doing a good job, everything's fine, God's happy with the priests. Fair, that's a fair point. But we also have Malachi, who also tells us that God is not happy with the priests. So things start off really well with Zechariah, or at least in Zechariah's day. And just like we're told at the beginning of Joel, they haven't been teaching their kids. And so they're not learning, and the generations are in decline. So whether or not you're completely convinced about Joel being where he is, Malachi is going to tell us also the priests aren't doing a good job, and God's not happy with the current priests. So and the way I kind of think of it, you've got Haggai and Zechariah, who are the generation of Ezra, right? They're fully grown, 30s, 40s, I don't know. They're in that generation that rebuilds the temple. I think Joel is possibly the next generation of prophet, right? So maybe he's a kid when the temple was rebuilt. Maybe he was born around the time the temple was rebuilt, but he's that next generation. And then we get the next generation, which is going to be Malachi. So we're seeing kind of, I think, a generational steps. So Joel's the generation after Zechariah, and then Malachi is the next generation, and we're going to see things are just getting worse and worse, which should be what we expect, right? Things shouldn't be getting better, obviously, because if things were getting better, there wouldn't be any problems that need to be solved when we get to Matthew, right? Because after Malachi comes Matthew. So verse 10, the fields are destroyed, the land grieves, indeed the grain is destroyed, the new wine is dried up, and the olive oil fails. So this seems like it's not just the locust, right? The locust ate everything, but it's not just that. There are other factors, like everything seems to be not going well. And as we were told back in Zechariah, that they're back in the land, God's going to bless them, and so on, and these aren't going to be issues anymore. But they are, presumably, again, because, as Joel told us, they're not teaching their kids, and things are clearly in decline. Verse 11, be ashamed, you farmers, wail, you vine dressers, over the wheat and the barley, because the harvest of the field has perished. The grapevine is dried up, and the fig tree is withered. The pomegranate, the date palm, and the apple, all the trees of the orchard have withered. Indeed, human joy has dried up. He says be ashamed, which is really odd to me, because if this is something purely supernatural or purely outside of the hands of the farmers, why are they shamed? Right? It's something you can't control, right? This is just an act of God. We can compare it to, I think it's appropriate to compare it when we did Ruth. That was a while ago. But there's a famine in the land, a famine that God caused because he is sovereign. And we ask the question, right, is this something that's been done in judgment? Well, we're not told. And so Elimelech and Naomi, they leave because of the famine. And the question is, were they right to leave? Well, the Bible doesn't say if they were right or wrong. We know that Abraham, during a time of famine, went all the way to Egypt to get food, and it's not treated as a bad thing. He just went to get food. So just because there's a disaster doesn't necessarily mean it's an act of judgment or that the people have done anything to deserve it. It's a disaster. But here it seems like some of the blame, if not most of the blame, is on the people. The people have been acting in a way that deserves this judgment. Verse 13, dress in sackcloth and lament, you priests. Wail, you ministers of the altar. Come and spend the night in sackcloth, you ministers of my God, because grain and drink offerings are withheld from the house of your God. This is an incredible verse. For one thing, this is one of the few times in the prophets that we actually have the command to not only lament, but to put on the sackcloth, to go through the process of lamentation. Which is really odd saying it out loud, but we've already gone through all these prophets. It's just, how many times have we seen it? The answer is really not at all. And yet, they're told to do this. Not only the people, presumably, but you've got the priests. The priests are not acting correctly. Because we have the people, right, the farmers are not acting correctly. The priests are not doing their job correctly. And because of that, God is not accepting the offerings, which is really, really bad, right? There is a process. The people have to be, and we've already seen this kind of with Zechariah, we've already had it sort of spelled out. The people need to be cleansed, and they need to not only be physically, but spiritually cleansed, so that they are right with God, and then they can offer their sacrifices, and then God will accept them. But before even that can happen, the priests have to be cleansed, right? That's why we needed Zechariah. That's why we needed, in Zechariah, we had Joshua and all of that take place. So everything needs to be cleansed, everything needs to be right, and then God will start accepting their sacrifices and offerings. He's not accepting them anymore, or at least it hasn't fully come about yet. This is a really, really interesting parallel because here Joel is flat out saying you need to go through this, right? You need to put on the sackcloth, you need to wail, you need to mourn, and so on, go through all of this. The comparison, or rather the contrast, is in Jonah, right? So in Jonah, we have this, Nineveh. Nineveh is just told that God is not happy with them, right? Jonah just shows up one day and says, hey, my God isn't happy, he's going to judge you. There's no earthquake, there's no locusts, there's no supernatural sign other than this crazy prophet just showing up and saying, hey, my God isn't very happy with you. And of their own volition, they put on sackcloth and ashes, and sit in ashes. Of their own volition, they start asking for forgiveness. They're a bunch of no good, dirty, rotten pagans, and they know they need to ask for forgiveness. Here, we've got God's own people that need to be prodded like cattle. They've got a plague of mildew. I don't know what that is. I can't get past that. They've had locusts. They've had all of these signs, and here's Joel begging them, you need to ask for forgiveness. Now, are they going to do it? I have no idea. I've got my doubts, because Malachi is going to not be very happy with them either. But again, we've got Nineveh. You wonder, why was God so lenient with Nineveh? Because they did it without being asked to do it. Jonah didn't tell them to ask for forgiveness. He didn't tell them to put on sackcloth. He just said, you're gone. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and yet they still did this, and God was willing to relent. And I think it is fair to say, if God's people were to go through even this much, how contrite was it? How earnest was it? What all did they do? Did they do it correctly? Probably not. They're a bunch of no good, dirty, rotten pagans. And yet God was still willing to accept that as an act of contrition. Verse 14, announce a sacred fast, proclaim an assembly, gather the elders and all the residents of the land at the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord. This is a huge 180, because if you remember, hopefully you do, back in Zechariah, we had the whole assembly come together because they came to Zechariah and said, do we still need to hold fasts? And Zechariah, just like being the exacerbated pastor that he is, he's like, well, the reason why you were doing fasts is because you were doing it during the exile as an act of, to kind of go through the motions of asking God for help. But now that you're in the land, you're like, well, do we still have to do it? And he doesn't kind of spell it out this precisely, but I think the sentiment is there. His attitude is basically, if you have to ask, you're probably not doing it right, or you're not doing it for the right reasons. Now, where he ends up, which I think is a great way to end up, is he says that one day you'll get to the point where you'll want to fast. You won't have to ask, or you won't have to be prodded or whatnot. Now, again, as I made the joke then, I'll make it now. I've never felt so spiritually fulfilled that I wanted to fast. But Zechariah says that we will be there. I don't know if any of you have. You can, whatever your thoughts are on that. But here we've got Joel basically saying you need to fast. So again, if we're just one generation removed, that's a huge step in the wrong direction, right? With Zechariah, they're like, hey, should we fast? And he's like, well, are you going to do it for the right reasons? And the answer is probably no. Here, Joel is like, you need to fast. Right? You need to put on the sackcloth. You need to sit in the ashes. You need to beg for forgiveness. And yes, you need to fast if you want to postpone whatever judgment is coming. And judgment is coming. Again, we can contrast this in Jonah. Oh, what a great book. So in Jonah 3, then he issued, he being, he's called the king, although he's not the emperor. This is the local ruler of Nineveh. We might even call him a mayor. But the one who presides over Nineveh. By order of the king and his nobles, no man or beast, herd or flock is to taste anything at all. They must not eat or drink water. This is one of the most incredible acts in the Old Testament because they're not told to do this. Jonah doesn't say this is what you need to do. And not only are they completely refraining from food, there's no water, which I think, now, to be fair, as an aside, we don't get a whole lot of details about how to do a fast. But to say no food at all and even no water seems a tad extreme. Furthermore, nowhere in Scripture are animals ever told to fast. And nowhere does God say, when you fast, keep food away from your animals. Like you generally need to feed your animals, right? You don't want your horses or dogs or cows falling over from exhaustion. And yet here, even the animals are fasting, which is just amazing. And it is funny to think, like, when they made the animals fast, what did that look like? Did they put sackcloth on the cows? Did they make their dogs, like, sit in ashes? Did they, chase around cats and put on, can you imagine chasing cats around and putting sackcloth on cats? That would just be incredible. Did they do it to birds? Like, did they catch birds and then put, sackcloth on birds? I have no idea what this means. This is just one of the most bizarre and fascinating little tidbits in the Bible. And why tell us? Why tell us that the animals were forced to fast? Now, so we've got what happened in Jonah and with Nineveh. We can contrast this with Amos. I overthrew some of you as I overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, and you were like a burning stick snatched from a fire. Yet you did not return to me. This is the Lord's declaration. Therefore, Israel, this is what I will do to you, and since I will do that to you, Israel, prepare to meet your God. So this is towards the end of chapter 4. This is as he's already explained that God has done all of these things, right? He sent all of these plagues, he sent the locusts, he's done all of these threats, and that he's judged them in a similar way to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah were completely wiped out. Israel's going to be wiped out too, although in a slightly different way with the invading army. But Israel has received all of these warnings and hasn't done anything. And so we get it's a great little line because it's, I think, intentionally ambiguous, right? At the very end, Israel, prepare to meet your God, which is in the Bible. This statement can be a very good thing. It can be a really bad thing. It depends on the context of the meeting, right? Meeting God could be a really, really great thing, presumably if you're in a good relationship with him. It can be a really bad thing if you're not in. I can't find it. I kept thinking it was in Proverbs. It's not in Proverbs. But there's a verse in the Bible that says, it is a good thing to stand before the king. And then the very next sentence, it is a bad thing to stand before the king. And of course, the issue is the context, right? Why are you standing before the king? And this brings us to what I've said over and over again is kind of the overarching theme of the prophets, which is divine judgment. When God reveals himself, he does it in judgment. And this, I think, is best illustrated back in Jonah. As I've said, in Joel, especially these first two chapters, we see a lot of parallels in what Jonah is going through with Nineveh, but also what Amos is going through with Israel, right, in different contexts. So when God brings judgment, it is a revelation, right? When God sent the mildew, when he sent the locust, this is an act of revelation. And the reason why he does this, why he reveals himself through judgment, is because he wants the people to respond. And when they respond, this allows for a conversation, right? God wants the conversation. Now you can go, well, but he shouldn't have to do this to have the conversation. You're right. You're absolutely right. He wants to have a conversation without prodding you like you're some kind of cattle. What's stopping you from having the conversation with him? Usually because you're too busy doing whatever else you're doing or sinning or whatever. And so he has to get your attention. And he does that through judgment, like putting mildew in your bathroom, which, again, is just really funny. I'm not letting that go. So with Nineveh, right, he sends Jonah as an act of judgment. And the people recognize that this is revelation. And the king even says, let's do a fast. Maybe this will get God's attention, right? And then once that happens, God allows for the conversation, which we get through God and Jonah. It's not a good conversation because Jonah's kind of an idiot. But, again, this sets all of this up. And we're told with Amos, we're told this with Hosea and others, where they'll say, if you repent, God will respond to you. So if you respond, he responds, there's the conversation. And whether or not Joel explicitly says it, this seems to be Joel's whole point, right? God is sending all this judgment as a warning, like he did back in Jonah's day, like he did in Amos's day, like he did in Zephaniah's day. And so if you don't want to go through, because again, I think we're in post-exile. If you don't want to go through what's already happened, right, with the Assyrians, with the Babylonians, then you need to repent now before things get worse. But are they going to? No. Things are going to get worse. Verse 15. Woe because of that day, for the day of the Lord is near, and it will come as devastation from the Almighty. So no, they're not going to change, they're not going to repent, and this is going to bring about what I will say is the final day of the Lord. Again, we're dealing with the eschaton. And as I've already pointed out, we have our three doom and gloom prophets, really just the main three, but we had Amos, who was warning about their disobedience, he was warning Israel, and he was looking forward to what would become the Assyrian invasion. And then we had Zephaniah, who warned them the same way Amos was warning them. And he was looking forward to the Babylonian invasion. And now we have Joel. And he's in the post-exile. They've already lived through two of these, and he's warning them another one is coming. And this is going to be far worse than the first two. So we have Amos. This is, again, I think a very important verse in the Minor Prophets. Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Will it be the day of the Lord? What will the day of the Lord be for you? It will be darkness and not light. Zephaniah, be silent in the presence of the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is near. Indeed, the Lord is prepared to sacrifice. He has consecrated his guests. And of course, the sacrifice is Judah, right? They're the ones that are going to be drawn and quartered and sacrificed on the altar. It's symbolic, but that's the image. So, again, going back to our dating, if we put Joel in the Assyrian period, that puts him roughly right after Amos. Now, we could make it work. I don't really like doing this, but the idea would basically be Amos is warning about the Assyrians. That's his day of the Lord. And so now Joel is warning, saying, yes, the Assyrians are coming, but this is a prelude to a future day of the Lord, which I'm not really happy with. The same would go with Zephaniah. So if he's in the Babylonian period, then he's writing sometime right after Zephaniah, making the same warning. Yes, the Babylonians are coming, but something worse is on the horizon. I prefer putting him in post-exile, which he's looked back on the previous two, and he's warning them another day is coming, a final day is coming, and it's going to be a lot worse than what's already happened. And this also really nicely sets up Malachi, because Malachi is going to have some words too about this final judgment. So verse 16, hasn't the food been cut off before our eyes, joy and gladness from the house of our God? So we've already played this game, like what exactly do we mean by house? Can it refer to the country of Judah? Can it refer to the monarchy? Can it refer to the temple? Here it probably does refer to the temple because we've been talking about the priests, we've talked about sacrifices and so on. But I do like this verse. Hasn't the food been cut off before our eyes? This seems to be a rather loaded statement, right? The locusts came, eating all their crops, but not just that. There's been additional devastation, right? The olive presses have not been generating olive oil. The wine has run out. So there's more going on than just the immediate effects of the locust. So food has been cut off, but not only that, God is also not accepting the sacrifices. So the offerings to the temple have been cut off. And because of that, there is no joy and gladness from the house of God. This could be, again, because the people aren't happy because of the devastation and the plagues, but it could also be that the joy is cut off because God's not happy with the priests. The priests are not doing their job. So this is a rather ambiguous statement. The fact is, things are not well in Israel. God isn't happy with them, the people are unhappy, and so it's just in a bad state. Verse 17, the seeds lie shriveled in their casings, the storehouses are in ruin, and the granaries are broken down because the grain has withered away. How the animals groan, the herds of cattle wander in confusion, since they have no pasture. Even the flocks of sheep suffer punishment. This is it's sad, but it's also kind of funny. So this, again, seems to go beyond just the locusts, right? The locusts were devastating. It was very visual. They experienced it. They know something serious was going on with the locusts. But there's other stuff going on that seems to go beyond just the swarm of locusts. Not only that, the animals, possibly because of lack of food, but also the animals know something is wrong. Even the animals are somewhat being punished, which again is a really interesting contrast to Jonah, right? Because the animals are tied to the land. Even the animals fasted. Even the animals were in repentance, which is really, really funny. It almost makes you feel that Francis of Assisi was onto something when he would go out and preach to the animals. That is true. That's one of my favorite stories about Francis of Assisi, right? He'd go to a city, he started preaching, and if the people didn't respond the way he wanted to, he'd go out into the woods and preach to all the animals. And when people would ask, what are you doing? He goes, well, they're more receptive. I like Francis of Assisi. He was crazy, but he was really interesting. He wasn't, I don't know, he might have been crazy. But here we have, this is right at the end of the book. This is a great ending to a very interesting book. So the Lord said, you cared about the plant, right? That's the little gourd that grew up, which you did not labor over and did not grow. It appeared in a night and perished in a night. Should I not care about the great city of Nineveh, which has more than 120,000 people who cannot distinguish between their right and their left, as well as many animals? Like, why that little statement? That God doesn't just care about the city, he doesn't just care about the human souls, but he does also care about the animals. Possibly because he likes the animals, right? When he spared Noah, he spared the animals as well. When he made the planet, even before Adam was put on there, he had the animals. God likes the animals. He likes the cows, he likes the sheep, he likes the dogs, he likes the tigers and the lions. He just likes animals. And so he doesn't want to see the animals mistreated, he doesn't want to see them brought to harm. So here we have a very interesting statement. Now, if we go back to our plagues, even the animals are affected, right? One of the plagues is the disease of the livestock. So God will bring judgment on the animals. And here we have a specific mention of even the animals suffering under this judgment. So the land itself is not only tainted because of the locusts and everything else, but even the animals are being judged. Verse 19. I call to you, Lord, for fire has consumed the pastures of the wilderness, and flames have devoured all the trees of the countryside. Even the wild animals cry out to you. So not just the domestic animals, right, those who are living under the stewardship or ownership of the Jews, but even the wild animals are being judged. For the riverbeds are dried up, the fire has consumed the pastures of the wilderness. So is this, again, because we're dealing with an apocalyptic book. I keep bringing that up, or an eschatological book. Is this literal? Was there a wildfire on top of all the other problems? I don't know. Is this more symbolic, or is this future? I don't know. He could be describing just one thing after another that's been going on, or this could be symbolic, looking towards a future judgment or part of the future judgment. It's hard to tell with Joel. Chapter 2. Blow the horn in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the residents of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. In fact, it is near. So we've already heard or seen very similar statements. So Amos talks about if a ram's horn is blown in a city, aren't people afraid? If a disaster occurs in the city, hasn't the Lord done it? And Hosea, again, we're dealing with the Assyrian judgment. Put the horn to your mouth. One like an eagle comes against the house of the Lord because the transgress my covenant and rebel against my law. Ezekiel, he talks about blowing the horn and warning the people. So, and this goes with Amos' statement, when the horn is blown, usually it's for a reason. And there are two main reasons. So you could blow the horn during some sort of celebration, right? The people are out and they're blowing horns. But usually when there's a celebration, for whatever reason, whether it's religious or something else, there's usually a build-up to that. It's something that you anticipate. If the horn, and this goes back to Amos saying, if the horn is blown, aren't people afraid? Because if the horn is blown and you don't expect it, usually it's a warning. Like someone, letting people know there's a disaster coming or there's an army invading or whatever. And as we've seen over and over again, one of the designations of the prophets they are the watchmen. They're the ones who are watching for disaster, watching the signs, and so on. And so one of their jobs, one of their main jobs is they sound the alarm when things go bad. So here's Joel taking on his, even though he doesn't call himself the watchman, he is taking on that role that others like Ezekiel had, and he's watching for the disaster. Well, disaster is coming. And he is now warning, we need to sound the horn. Now, did he actually have a horn? I don't know. This might just be more symbolic. But people need to be warned that this day of the Lord, this day of judgment is coming. And here we get a very famous verse. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and dense overcast, like the dawn spreading over the mountains. A great and strong people appear, such as never existed in ages past and never will again in all the generations to come. This sounds pretty ominous, and this sounds pretty absolute. So the day of the Lord is coming, this day of invasion, this day of judgment, and it is going to be done through a people more great, more deadly, or whatever than what has happened before, which also seems to suggest that they have endured something like this before, and what is coming is going to be even worse. So we've already read Amos, but we go on. It'll be day of darkness, not light. I just like this passage. It will be like a man who flees from a lion only to have a bear confront him. He goes home and rests his hand against the wall only to have a snake bite him. Won't the day of the Lord be darkness rather than light? I just love the image where the day of the Lord is like the series of almost Looney Tune-like actions where you're walking along the road and you find a lion. So you run from the lion to meet a bear, and then you run from the bear to get home, and once you think you're safe in the house, a snake bites you. Right? There's no way to avoid this judgment. And then Zechariah, he says very similarly, on the day there will be no light, the sunlight and moonlight will diminish. It will be a day known only to Yahweh. So Zechariah seems to be anticipating, even back in Zechariah, this final day of the Lord, this final day of judgment. Verse 3, a fire destroys in front of them, and behind them a flame devours. The land in front of them is like the Garden of Eden, but behind them it is a desert wasteland. There is no escape from them. So this is, again, it's probably safer to say that we are now fully in the apocalyptic section, even though up to this point it's been hard to say for sure. But we have this image. And if you can visualize it, you visualize, because it's being described through an image. You've got this very lush, very beautiful area, very green and so on, and you can just kind of picture this almost Edenic-like place with trees and flowers and all this great stuff. And then imagine this devastating wildfire that's just sweeping through. If you've seen footage out of California recently or whatever, you can kind of imagine this. There's what comes to my mind, for those who've seen it, I don't necessarily recommend it, but the God's Supposed to Be Crazy, where there's a scene where there's the bad guys or whatever start a wildfire, and so the brush is being consumed by fire. And you can actually see you've got the brush on one side and the fire on the other. So on one side, you got kind of it's not really lush, but you've got the thickets and the brush, and it's kind of a greenish tan. But then you got this line, and as it moves, it's replaced by just black ash. You can kind of see the line move as it's destroying everything. So here I've got this picture. On the one side, you've got all the greenery, all the trees, all the forest, and then you've got just nothing as the fire goes through. And this is the image, right? This is what the day of the Lord is going to be like. It's going to be just this devastation that sweeps through and leaves nothing behind. The people should already have a sense of what this is like because they've already lived through the locust swarm. So they should remember what it was like before the locusts, when everything was green and growing and so on, and now they know what the after is, where there's just nothing left. So we are fully in our apocalyptic section, and as I've mentioned before, we have mainly 4 prophets who deal in apocalypticism. We don't always think of these 4, but we've got 4. You have Ezekiel, who's got his apocalyptic. Chronologically, he should probably be our first, depending on where you date Joel. But then you got Daniel, right? He's got a lot of apocalyptic. He's more popular than Ezekiel, although I like Ezekiel quite a bit. Then there's Zechariah, who we just finished. And now we've got Joel, who of the 4 might be the most famous. I'm not sure. Verse 4. Their appearance is like that of horses, and they gallop like war horses. They bound on the tops of the mountains. Their sound is like the sound of chariots, like the sound of fiery flames, consuming stubble, like a mighty army deployed for war. So we now have this very elaborate, very strong image. Something is coming. So is he just describing the locust swarm? Right? Is he bringing back that image? Or, right, so we've got the appearance like that of horses, and they gallop like war horses. What is he comparing to horses, I guess, in the sound of them? Is this the locusts that they have just endured, right, the ravaging swarm that went through? Is he talking about the Assyrians, right, if we go back and date this around the time of Amos or a little after? Is he warning about the Babylonians, or is he warning about something truly future? And if it is future, how future is this? Is he warning about the Greeks? Is he warning about the Romans? Is he warning about something far off, such as in our time? Or again, is it something even future from us? It's hard to say. This is apocalyptic, so this could very well be talking truly about the end times. I have no idea when that'll happen. It's called the end times. We've got plenty of places, but probably Revelation 9 is the most poignant and the easiest place to go, where it talks about, the fifth angel blew the trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from heaven to earth. The key to the shaft of the abyss was given to him. And we're finally talking about Revelation, and Larry's not here. Oh well, you snooze, you lose. He opened a shaft of the abyss, and smoke came up out of the shaft like smoke from a great furnace, so that the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke from the shaft. Then locusts came out of the smoke onto the earth. So this passage in Revelation could very easily be connected to Joel, right? What we're just reading about. They had this invasion of the locusts, and this is setting the precedent for this coming invasion that's going to destroy the earth and be just the worst possible thing you can imagine. So the locusts, again, set the precedent, and through the devastation of the locusts, we have an idea, or at least they have an idea, of what this new army is going to be. And it's quite possible that the prophecy that Joel is talking about is the same thing that John is talking about here in Revelation 9. Again, in verse 7, the appearance of the locusts was like horses equipped for battle. We have that exact same connection. The locusts were like horses. Are they really, really big locusts? We talk about horse flies. We call them horse flies because they're really big. I don't think flies look like horses, and I wouldn't confuse the two. I've never seen a fly as big as a horse, although I've seen horse flies, and they are really nasty and they are really big. I don't quite think that's what John is talking about. He's probably making another kind of comparison. But we get the idea, right, that this invading army is devastating like the locusts. And again, John is probably very much pulling the analogy and even the prophecy off of what Joel is warning about. So we can get kind of a sense of chronological depth. So Joel, back in the 5th century, is already looking forward to this massive future invasion that even at the time of John hadn't happened yet. So this is probably still future. Verse 6, nations writhe in horror before them. So again, this is this future army. Again, if we can link this to John, which I'm happy to do, because I'm happy to say that that's future and that is literal. When this will happen, I don't know. Is John talking about the Russians? Is he talking about the Chinese? I have no idea. I just don't. And I don't pretend like I know. Are we talking about helicopters or drones? Or I have no idea. And I don't pretend to know. I like being in the Old Testament. So leave the New Testament for people, I won't say smarter than me, but more arrogant than me, which is really impressive. But nations writhe in horror before them. All faces turn pale. They attack as warriors attack. They scale walls as men of war do. Each goes on his own path. And they do not change their course. Again, you can imagine, or at least they can imagine, the locusts just coming through, swarming everything, climbing over everything. In zombie movies, you can see these waves of zombies, and they just destroy everything. They climb over stuff. I don't know if that's quite what it's like, but you get kind of the image of this devastating wave of humans destroying everything. Verse 8, They do not push each other. Each man proceeds on his own path. They dodge the arrows, never stopping. They storm the city. They run on the wall. They climb into the houses. They enter through the windows like thieves. Again, you can kind of imagine the parallel to the locust, the swarm that's just destroying everything, that's swarming over everything, and that's getting into everything. Verse 10, the earth quakes before them, the sky shakes, the sun and moon grow dark, and the stars cease their shining. So, because we're still comparing this future army invasion to the locusts come and they're so massive, there's so many of them that it sounds like the earth itself is shaking because of the sound of the locusts. If we're comparing this to armies, you can, if you've seen war footage or whatever, you got this huge army of men. It's like the earth is shaking underneath as they come, whether they're on horses or tanks or whatever. The sky shakes, the sun and the moon grow dark. This could be a metaphor. It could be describing how when the locusts come, it's like they're blotting out the sun, right? Because there's just so many. It's like the sky kind of turns dark. So again, we are clearly, at this point, we're superimposing two images. And that's how we need to think about it. He is clearly using this moment in time, this massive locust invasion that they have a frame of reference to, but he's using that to describe or to make an analogy of what this future army is going to be like. So again, he's taking the two images and kind of running them together. I'm using the Romans because they're a future threat to Israel, and they're the current threat during the time of Revelation. But according to John, this hasn't happened yet. So at some point in the future. I have no idea how far into the future. But verse 11, the Lord raises his voice in the presence of his army. His camp is very large. Those who carry out his command are powerful. Indeed, the day of the Lord is terrible and dreadful. Who can endure it? And this is a wonderful verse. Because, and this is also why I get kind of tired about talking about Revelation. It doesn't really interest me, getting lost in all the imagery and the symbolism and whatnot, because this is the point, right? The day of the Lord is not this army that's coming. Right? They are not the judgment. God is the judgment. It's his day. And even though this army is coming, even though this devastation is coming, it is all prelude to what God's going to do. Because he's got his own army. He's got his own plans. And his army is more powerful than that army. So as much as we built, this is what a good storyteller does. He's built up this massive army, talking about how great it is, how devastating it is, how powerful it is, and then he goes, oh, by the way, God's got his own army, and it's better. And he's got his own plans. Now, the judgment is still coming, and the people of God are going to get caught up in this judgment, which is bad. But, again, this is all building up to the final day, this final confrontation, as we know also because we can compare this to Revelation. And this is not the first time that we've had this described. So Zephaniah, right, our second day of the Lord prophet, Yahweh your God is among you, a warrior who saves. So Zephaniah, in a very similar way, he builds up this Babylonian invasion. He builds up this Babylonian judgment. And part of that is to reassure them that, yes, the Babylonians are coming. Yes, the Babylonians are fierce, and they've got their armies and so on. But so does God, right? And God's army is better. He is still protecting his people. A warrior who saves, he will rejoice over you with gladness. He will bring your quietness with his love. He will delight in you who shouts of joy. And then Zechariah, who we just read, who's also an apocalyptic prophet. He goes, I will set up camp at my house against an army, against those who march back and forth, and no oppressor will march against them again, for now I have seen with my own eyes. So Zechariah, right, who is also a post-exilic prophet, he is also letting them know that he's not really a day of the Lord prophet, but he also warns them that a day of invasion is coming, that there will again be an enemy who will march against God's people, but this time God is prepared, and he is going to fight against them, and they are not going to destroy them like they did in the previous events. So, on that note, we will end for tonight.